Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. Isis, Escape from Transylvania. The goddess next door and John Haynes must escape a horde of vampires on the hunt in this horror-filled Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Escape from Transylvania in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. I was on Twitter this Sunday doing a birthday book promotion for my birthday where I was giving free ebooks to my readers as a gift when I noticed Joe Quesada, the chief creative officer at Marvel Comics, having a complete meltdown on social media. And as I read through the tweets where your Joe Quesada continued to go back and forth with many people who are so considered a part of Comicsgate, like Diversity in Comics, Just Some Guy, and Yellow Flash, and many others, and many casual comic fans, it just made me shake my head, because here we have Joe Quesada, a senior executive at Marvel, participating in the behavior many people in Comicsgate have accused them of being extremely unprofessional on social media. And with a senior executive participating in this kind of behavior, it proves the point that management supports this sort of unprofessional behavior as a social norm. And when I looked at that behavior, again, I can understand where Max Bemis got the justification to talk about how he could feast upon someone's anus, and there was no discipline implemented on this individual participating in this unprofessional behavior, because we have a senior executive participating in the exact same behavior, and that is creating a culture in the company that lets other people in Marvel know that they can go out here and abuse people online. And that's what is really bad about this whole situation, is that your Joe Quesada was so caught up in his emotions regarding Richard C. Meyer, also known as Diversity in Comics, that he wasn't thinking about how his behavior reflected not only on comic fans, but casual customers who had followed him on Twitter, because many of those casual customers, they were retweeting his tweet, and they were retweeting those exchanges, and what they were doing was letting the world know that this is how a senior executive at Marvel behaves. And I believe the reason why your Joe Quesada went off on that emotional tirade is because we are getting near the end of the fiscal year, and your Joe Quesada doesn't have any answers to give Bob Iger and those senior Disney executives regarding Marvel's continuously declining state. Because your Bob Iger and Disney executives at the end of the fiscal year, they're going to be looking at the numbers as related to Marvel, and when they notice these steep declines in sales and see that Marvel isn't growing, they're going to start looking at Joe Quesada and asking some tough and critical questions that he just can't answer without holding himself accountable for the complete failure of Marvel due to their forced diversity initiative. And when it comes down to your Joe Quesada, he's going to have a hard time explaining how your Richard C. Meyer made all this money with Jawbreakers Lost Souls, made at least, I think, about $400,000. And he's going to have a hard time explaining how Ethan Van Sciver has made over $500,000 with Cyberfrog. And he's going to have an even harder time explaining how all of these other small independent creators like Josh Howard and many others are making money on their independent comics projects, yet Marvel cannot even move 5,000 units of many of their A and B characters at Marvel. So when your Joe Quesada knows that his days as Chief Creative Officer are numbered, and what he's looking to do is try to find some sort of scapegoat to blame for his failures, and there's nobody to blame but him, because he was the weak and ineffective leader who refused to take charge at Marvel, even after the New York Comic Con incident, where comic shop owners told Marvel executives that they wanted to see a change at Marvel, and they didn't see that change at Marvel. Marvel's fresh start was a false start. Your C.B. Cebulski has been proven to be an ineffective editor-in-chief, and your Joe Quesada has been proven to be an ineffective chief creative officer, and your Sana Amanat has been proven to be an incompetent vice president of content and character development. And all of these people know that Disney is now going, at the end of the fiscal year, going to start running down the numbers, and they're going to start looking critically at the state of Marvel, an asset they bought to make money for them. And as they look at the state of the publishing division, they're really going to start, again, asking those hard questions as related to the state of Marvel. And Joe Quesada knows that the answers he has to give aren't going to be ones Disney executives want to hear. And because those Disney executives aren't going to want to hear that Joe Quesada has been supporting these creators in attacking customers on social media, promoting products and pushing products customers don't want, and fostering a negative relationship with the customer, what's going to happen is, with the buck stopping with Joe Quesada, what's going to happen is Bob Iger and many of these Disney executives, they're going to be starting to think about Joe Quesada not working for Marvel. They're thinking about firing Joe Quesada because he's proven that he cannot be an effective leader, he cannot be an effective manager, he cannot maintain any sort of professional standards, he cannot really supervise or control his employees. And because he can't do these things that a senior executive should be able to do, or even a first-line manager of a business should be able to do, that's why Marvel will seriously be getting a new chief creative officer, probably somebody from one of Disney's other publishing divisions, to take over Marvel, because it's clear that Joe Quesada just couldn't do the job. Neither could C.B. Cebulski. So we could be looking at a major change in management. That's if Disney just doesn't decide to fold up the entire Marvel publishing division and then start outsourcing and licensing the publication of their comics to one of their other publishing divisions. So with this whole situation with Joe Quesada, this tantrum he threw, it was all about him knowing that his job was in jeopardy and knowing that it's going to be the beginning of the end for him at the end of the fiscal year, because he can no longer lie about the state of Marvel anymore. The numbers clearly are showing that he can't get the sales that the Marvel division is supposed to get. And with all of these independent creators getting their Kickstarters funded, getting these Indiegogos funded into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, Marvel can no longer make excuses like saying the audience is shrinking, because we clearly see that there is an audience for comic books out there, but they're not buying Marvel comics because Joe Quesada is an ineffective leader, and he's allowed his editorial to create this mandate where they're going to do this forced diversity and identity politics, and that these comics that are being published at Marvel are of the poorest quality in the history of the brand. So with your Joe Quesada, he can't escape with excuses anymore, and that's why he went on that tirade trying to discredit diversity in comics. Unfortunately, in his attempt to discredit diversity in comics, and many of the comic fans who were a part of the so-called Comicsgate community, he proved the point that the Comicsgate community has been making regarding the behavior of many of these so-called comic pros, in the way that they mistreat the customer, the way they create all this drama on social media, the way that they are unprofessional in the way they approach people on social media, and they also prove the point that many of these so-called comics pros just are out of control because the senior executive in charge of them is not in control himself. Now, if I was a chief creative officer at Marvel right now, instead of me trying to sit there and go back and forth with someone like a Diversity in Comics, I would be taking a look on the inside and trying to figure out ways to improve the quality of the products of the Marvel brand and taking responsibility for the products of the Marvel brand. Because when I looked at your Joe Quesada's tweets on Twitter, I saw a man who refused to take responsibility for his employees, he refused to take responsibility for the product being produced, and he refused to take responsibility for the state of things as related to Marvel. I mean, this man had an entire year to get things right, yet Marvel's current state is still in the same dysfunctional state it was in 2017 when all those comic shop owners came to New York Comic Con and demanded that Marvel change. And instead of them giving readers that fresh start that they promised in their Fresh Start campaign, we got a false start and then the continued reinforcement of pushing the whole social justice, identity politics narrative that Marvel had been pushing that led to their 90% drop in sales. And instead of Marvel's executives really taking a critical look at their sales numbers, looking at their customer relations, and looking at their reputation, we got a doubling down by your Joe Quesada, your C.B. Cebulski, your Sana Amanat, and many of these comic pros in continuing to try to push the very same comics and narrative that many comic fans have literally denounced over the last 2 to 3 years and said they do not want this, they do not want to buy this, yet Marvel continues to push it. And to see this man having this meltdown on social media, that was embarrassing, not only for Joe Quesada, but it was embarrassing for Marvel as a company. When you have a senior executive attacking comic fans, attacking customers, and showing all of those casual customers out there that he has no respect for them, that's something that's a serious blemish on a brand like Marvel. And at this point, I see it, looking at the bigger picture of it, your Joe Quesada, again, has put the nail in his coffin as related to his career at Marvel, because there's no escaping these declining numbers. You can no longer blame the state of the comic books industry now that we see that Ethan Van Sciver and Richard C. Meyer and Josh Howard and many other independent comic pros are making all this money. We know that there is an audience for comics. We know that there are readers on the sidelines for comics. And this is something I have known for years myself as related to comics. I know that there are readers on the sidelines. I know that there are readers waiting for the next big thing. And they're waiting for that reason to come in and go out here and buy comics. But what they're seeing from these comic publishers is they're still caught up in an archaic approach to business. They're still trying to use gimmicks and reboots in the hopes of getting readers to come in, not understanding that reboots are a vicious cycle, and that with every reboot, what you do is you wind up alienating more and more readers because they have no more incentive to keep buying comics. And many of these reboots, again, and revamps, they just turn people away because there's no way for the book to build momentum when you know that the book will be canceled in 12 months. So all of these approaches that Marvel has been using over the last few years, they have turned readers away, because what I see what readers want great stories and they want stability. So they want two things. They want a consistent universe, they want consistent storytelling, And they also want comic professionals who know how to conduct themselves on social media, comic professionals who will go beyond just giving a reader a story, comic professionals who will go out of their way to provide customer service, because in this age of social media, you represent your product, you represent your business, and you represent the company you work for. You cannot be like a Max Bemis thinking that you can just go on Twitter and say whatever you want when you work for a company like Marvel. Because if you're writing a comic, you represent that comic book, you represent that company, and when you're representing that company, you want to put your best face forward so you can sell that next issue. I mean, if I was working at Marvel right now, my social media would primarily be filled with things like teasers for stories, or advice on how to write a good script, or tips on how to write things like dialogue and scenes, things that will enable the reader to get excited about comics. Because that's what I do right now in many of my videos, and that's what I do in many of my blogs as related to promoting the SJS Direct imprint and the books of the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the Eaststeam series, the John Haynes series, and books like The Temptation of John Haynes and the Spinsterella trilogy. I go out of my way to let people know how knowledgeable I am about a subject like the goth subculture, or to talk about African Americans in fantasy and science fiction, because I want people to get excited about those subjects, and I want to give them an incentive to go out here and buy my books and try my books. But we don't see that type of professionalism at a billion-dollar company like Marvel, and that's another embarrassing thing about Marvel. Here we have all these employees on the payroll of Marvel Comics, and none of them are concerned with selling comic books. Here at SJS Direct, my main mission as I write these books is sales. I want to go out here and sell books. I want to go out here and reach readers. So I try to put my best foot forward, and that means providing not only writing a great story, but again, providing the reader with great customer service. And this is something that has been a problem that has plagued the comic book industry for years. And your guys like your Joe Quesada, sadly, they don't seem to be concerned about the customer. I am really concerned about my customers. I really try to go out of my way for my customers, because I want to have a great relationship with my customers. Because in business, you really want to build relationships with customers, especially in publishing, because it's word of mouth that gets your books sold. If you can't build a good word of mouth, that book is not going to move. And when it comes down to many of these Marvel comics these days, they are not moving because of primarily the negative word of mouth they get. And that negative word of mouth is reinforced by many of these people who work at Marvel acting unprofessionally on social media. And when we saw Joe Quesada having that meltdown, it proved the point that management supports this. And management at Marvel has deflected and said, oh, they're freelancers, but we now see that we have senior executives who support these comic pros acting unprofessionally and showing how ineffective they are by making excuses by saying they're freelancers and independent contractors. No, if I work freelance for someone, I represent that company, and I have to maintain standards to ensure that that company's standards are met. And I also want to keep those standards, because the whole thing is I want to get other jobs, not only at that company, but with other companies, and you get that by remaining professional. But many of these so-called comics pros, they don't understand what professionalism is. They don't understand what customer service is, and they don't understand that you have to foster great relationships with readers on social media if you hope to build your brand and hope to generate those sales. So I look at this whole situation on Sunday, and it was like one of the more defining moments, and it just showed the desperation of people at Marvel when you have a senior executive having a meltdown because That senior executive now knows that with the end of the fiscal year, there's going to be senior executives at Disney looking at those numbers and looking at the numbers of these indie comics and really thinking about replacing your Joe Quesada and many of the senior executives at Marvel, because when you have a so-called industry leader not being able to get the sales of an indie comic like a Jawbreaker's Lost Souls or a Cyberfrog Blood Honey, that embarrasses that billion-dollar company, and the executives in that billion-dollar company are going to start thinking about changing the management so that they can change the direction of that brand that they bought for billions of dollars just a few years ago. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, The Temptation of John Haynes, the Spencerella Trilogy, and my men's issues books, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.